On this episode, we discuss the challenges of raising a kid halfway between a skeptical Western mindset and a more superstitious Eastern one.
So if you're curious how Greg approaches raising his half-Thai son to be a good critical thinker, you'll love this episode of the Bangkok Podcast.
Sawadee krab, and welcome to the Bangkok Podcast. My name is Greg Jorgensen, a Canadian who came to Thailand in 2001 with a dream to learn kon dancing, but when the guy asked me to audition for the role of monkey god Hanuman, and that I didn't even need a mask, I left and abandoned my dream.
So sad, so sad.
I know.
And I met Knuth, an American who came to Thailand on a one-year teaching contract 20 years ago, fell in love with Tom Yum Goong flavored potato chips, and I couldn't leave after that.
Those are good. Hey, true story. I've got a friend in quarantine right now. And she specifically, I said, do you want any snacks? I can bring you some snacks because she's staying in a hotel close to me. And she requested mian kam flavored potato chips. You know, those like leaves that you put
very
meat,
funny.
chili paste, and limes.
Yeah, that's right. Oh, that's great.
Yeah, she specifically requested those. So I went to 7-Eleven and bought a big bag of them.
Damn, she's gone local. She's gone local. Okay, we want to say a quick thank you to one of our patrons, Joe Girardi, who supports us at the show's shout-out level. Stick around after we're done talking about raising a kid with a Western mindset in an Eastern culture to hear why Joe just warmed the cockles of our hearts.
That's right.
I don't get to use the word cockles very much, so I'm excited. I'm excited to do that. All right. We want to give a big thanks to all of our patrons who support the show. Patrons get a whole bunch of cool stuff, including our ad-free regular show a day early, behind-the-scenes photos and videos of our interviews, discounts on swag, which you can find on our website, and various other things that aren't available to regular listeners. But best of all, patrons like Joe also get an unscripted, uncensored bonus episode every week where we riff on current events and random topics. We just finished recording this week's bonus show, and we chatted about the half-baked Phuket sandbox scheme, whether or not countries should vaccinate overseas nationals, and how some of the classic American movies I show in my film class are simply too much for some of my students to handle. To become a patron, head to bangkokpodcast.com/support.
Well, it's not like you're showing Last Tango in Paris or anything, are you?
I am not, although that's an interesting movie. That one was a little bit too much for me, to be honest.
Yeah. I don't want to have butter on bread for a long time after that.
Shh.
Okay.
This is a family show.
All right. All right. Well, on this episode, we wanted to jump into a topic that's been on our minds for quite some time and recently came to the fore again today for me. And that is what it's like raising a half-Thai, half-Farang kid with a logical, skeptical Western mindset in a culture that has its fair share of superstition. So before we get into it, I want to make it clear, lest we put our foot in our mouth for the following conversation, it's hard to compartmentalize things into Western and Eastern when it comes to this stuff, because there are tons of Asian people who are not superstitious, and tons of Westerners who are, and vice versa, and all different combinations of everything. So there you go. But generally speaking, I am a skeptical atheist living in a culture that is more superstitious and religious than the one I grew up in, so, well, there we go. The fine print is out of the way. Now, this came up today for me because my 6-year-old son asked me if ghosts were real. And I answered honestly that I didn't think they were, but some people did, which got me thinking about how this balancing act will manifest itself as he gets older. What about spirit houses or burning paper money and walking around a temple 3 times? Now, obviously, Western countries have their own share of superstitions too, but I think as a Westerner trying to raise a kid in an Eastern culture, this poses some interesting questions. And Ed, I was particularly interested to talk to you about this because you teach a critical thinking class to your university students. So sometime between now and the time my kid goes to university, I'm not sure what trajectory his belief system is going to take. And I'm not sure even how big of a role I will play in that. So it's just an interesting question. I thought we would have fun discussing.
No, I love the topic. I got to be honest. I have a lot of things to say about critical thinking and trying to be rational. I even have a lot of things to say about teaching critical thinking and rationality in Thailand. But I got to be honest, I'm not sure if I had kids how I would handle it. A lot would depend on my wife and my in-laws, and so I'm going to try not to be one of those people with no kids who lectures people with kids.
We love that, but
I'm sure you do. I'm sure you do. No, I don't know, man. Like, so I mean, I'm going to throw in my 2 cents, but I think I think the most important thing is what to do as a father in this unusual situation. And but let me just throw in my 2 cents. The first thing is, although if you did surveys and looked at averages, I believe that Thailand on average is more superstitious than the U.S. and Canada. I think it's a mistake to kind of focus on that, because I think there's just, some people in the West, as you pointed out in the intro, are very superstitious. There are many Thai people who don't believe in ghosts. So I'm not, so it's a little bit tricky to how to think about this. So, like when I teach critical thinking in my class, I really tell my students that it's not about the West versus the East. I say to them, I'm not teaching you how to think like a Westerner.
Right.
I'm teaching you a method of finding out the truth about the natural world. Like big parts of it may have been quote unquote discovered or invented in Europe, and it may be part of the Enlightenment or the scientific revolution. But I don't think it's really that helpful to think about it as Western versus Eastern. But it's actually it's a tricky question, because I do think there are aspects of Asian psychology that we've talked about before, that maybe there is some relevance there. It's hard to explain. I think I want, if I had a kid, I would want to be able to say ghosts are not real, because I don't want them to lie awake at night and be scared.
Right.
So it's like that. It's not even so much that I'm trying to teach them to be skeptical, because I think being skeptical is more about teaching your kids how to think instead of giving them answers. Right. But
that's right.
But when it comes to monsters in the closet or ghosts, I don't know, my tendency would be I just would give them answers.
Right. And that's an interesting idea of the verses, because when you are like, you're just by yourself without a kid, you can have these opinions of your own. And if I was by myself,
right,
and someone said, do you believe in ghosts? I'd say, of course not. No, I don't believe in ghosts. I don't believe in God. I'm an atheist. But when you have a kid and a wife, and you live in that mixed household, you can't just come down hard with, this is how I'm going to teach my kid to think.
Sure, right.
Right. So otherwise you risk the eventuality of it becoming a mom versus dad thing, an East versus West thing.
Yeah.
I think you don't want to draw lines that harshly.
I'm thinking that both of those things are that's not a fight you want to undertake. That's a bit. Don't go down there. So with my students, I really try to focus on the process and just try to push them to explain why they believe something. And we did a show about this a couple of years ago, but it's been a while since I talked about it. But since I'm teaching first semester freshmen, I really try to make things relatable and easy. So I don't jump into like formal logic, on day one. The first thing I do is I show the famous Bigfoot footage, the old stuff from the 70s, and it's really just a guy, probably a guy in a
like the
Chewbacca
film
suit.
of
it's like
monkey film.
It's like a guy in a Chewbacca suit or something. But this is, and the first thing I do is play that, and then I just ask my students, what do they think about it? I ask them,
interesting.
Do you think this is good evidence of there being a creature in the forest? Do you think it's good evidence? And if you do, why? And I just ask them, like, if it could be a Bigfoot, we don't know, we can't tell from the film. But if it's not a Bigfoot, what else could it be? And it's just pushing students to justify their beliefs.
Right.
But it's quite tricky though. I mean, I've developed my way, which I think is successful, or has been reasonably successful. But I found that it's foolish for me to try to hide what I think, and act like I'm totally neutral on the issue of ghosts. So I just will throw out here and there, I don't believe in this, I don't believe in that, but then I just try to explain why.
Right. Okay. Fair enough. But before we go any further, I want to read this. And I was doing some research for this article, and I came across this story from the New York Times in August 8th, 2000 by Erica Good. And it's a long story. and it's titled "How Culture Molds Habits of Thought." Very interesting story, but there's one takeaway I wanted to read here.
Sure.
And it said the researchers found that Easterners, that would include Asians, appear to think more holistically, paying greater attention to context and relationship, relying more on experience-based knowledge than abstract logic, and showing more tolerance for contradiction. Westerners, however, are more analytic in their thinking, tending to detach objects from their context to avoid contradictions and to rely more heavily on formal logic.
Okay. This was exactly my point. That there might actually be something to this East-West thing. That was my point. Like, I think it's just, I don't think that's the right thing to focus on, but I have read other things like this, that there might be some psychological aspects to it and cultural aspects to it. But I'm not sure, I'm not sure it's that important though. Like that, so that's interesting, and it might explain why the rate of superstition is different. But the bottom line is, if you're trying to teach someone how to think rationally, I think the process is the same. No, I mean,
right.
so I the stuff that I teach my students is exactly what I would teach Westerners if I was in the States. It's the course material. It's exactly the same.
I kind of envy your position though, because you can take that position. Like, no, I don't think that. But it's a bit more difficult for me personally, because when my son says, "Do you believe in ghosts?" I can't say no, I don't. That's ridiculous. And he would say why, because kids follow every question with another question. Why?
Right.
Until you want to blow your head off. But I can't come down and say no, I don't, and that's that, because I'm married to a Thai woman who does happen to believe in ghosts.
Right. No, this is my point. It's like I think I'm not saying I can't give any advice for like a father, but I'm totally with you, man. Teaching a critical thinking class is not the same thing as being a dad in this type of household.
No, but what I want to get into is asking him, like, eventually he's not old enough yet, but when he gets to the point, he'll say, "Do you believe in blah, blah, blah?" And I'll say, "Well, I don't. What do you think? And why do you think that?"
Yeah, for sure. I mean, that's kind of how I approach my students. But I try to push them, I try to ask them questions. I mean, it can be, for example, like when we discuss this issue of ghosts, I kind of use it as an example, and I'll say something like, okay, ghosts are spirits of dead people, right? Okay. And they obviously are supernatural. They don't obey the normal laws of physics or whatever. They can walk through walls or whatever, but then I'll say something like, so if ghosts are just spirits of dead people, how come they only appear at night? Like when people are dead, do they join some kind of like labor union and they have a contract and it's like, hey, I'm not working during the day.
Part like, of I'm a Nocturnal 212.
I'm a ghost. Like I'm a ghost. I don't work during the day. So I ask them questions like that, or how come ghosts essentially only appear when there's no lights and people are sleepy and their brain is not working very well? Stuff like that, and it's just pushing on it, but in the end, I'm not, my goal in my class is not to change people's minds about ghosts or something like that. Because I think that's just the wrong way to approach it. Because I think
that's what we have in common, because my goal is not to solidify my son's mind one way or the other.
That's right.
Even though maybe I'm probably biased towards doing that, because that's what happens to be what
tough.
I believe.
Yeah, you're right. You're right.
For instance, he's got a little table that, like, this little table that he has in the living room that's a kid-sized plastic table that he does his homework on and stuff like that. And it's got burn marks on it because when his kunyai, my wife's mom, was here for some recent holiday, we came out in the morning and that table had been pulled out onto the balcony and had like a couple of chicken carcasses on it and a pig's head and some incense and flowers and stuff like that. And some of the incense fell over and burned the plastic.
Oh, really? Okay.
And he was like, "Hey, what's my table out on the balcony for?" And
it's a ritual or a sacrifice.
Yeah, it's a ritual to honor the ancestors. It's a Chinese thing, I think. And I'm scoffing of it internally. I'm like, "Oh my God, what a waste of food."
Right.
And and he says too, like, "Why is this food? Are we going to eat that food?" And I was like, "No, Grandma's got to, Kunyai has to, put that out there to pray." And he's like, "But it's a waste of food, And it's just I've just got to be careful, because I don't want to turn him against, maybe that's a bit too harsh, but I don't want to turn him against one particular avenue of thought, because I know that ultimately I would like him to grow up pretty well rounded, being able to comfortably coexist in both spheres. You know what I mean?
That's right. That's right.
So I've just got to be careful on how I explain things and how I present my own views to him, because his mind is still young and malleable.
Yeah. This is part of it's funny. I mean, you and I just happen to be similar in the sense that we're both kind of like skeptical, atheistic, scientific minded. But the bottom line is we're not in the majority, so even if we're with Westerners or whoever we're with, we're usually not in the majority. And so I have many religious friends. I have a lot of yoga kind of / new age friends who believe stuff that I don't believe in. And so it's actually a useful life skill to just be able to handle that. And so I think your approach is correct. I mean, in this case, your son is going to have to deal with it in his own actual family. But the bottom line is, either way, we all have to deal with it in real life. There's for religious people, just dealing with me might be weird or hard, because they're like, how does he know how to be good if he doesn't believe in God? So everyone, for religious people to be hanging out with scientifically minded people or people who think God is not real, it's hard for them too.
Right. And I think your point about just existing as well, like just being in that situation might be good for a kid too, because he sees that despite dad's, fairly rigid beliefs in this, that, or the other, he's still able to marry a girl who, believes completely opposite things and loves someone like that. So
that's right.
Just me existing and not being a jerk about it probably is a teachable moment.
Yeah, no, I still think it's tricky, and you must find yourself in situations where you just want to, just scream, "No, that's not real,"
Yeah,
but
exactly. Yeah.
I've had to deal with it just because I teach this stuff, and because it's kind of part of my personality. I've just been in many awkward situations where, it's just like I don't know what to say, and it's just. It's just a socially tricky thing, because it's very easy to talk. In a way, in a classroom is the easiest place to be, because it's in a classroom things are defined as being about the idea.
Right. Okay.
So I can just say, here's this logical thing, whatever. But socially, there's more going on, and it's like so. And I don't want to be a jerk. I don't want to be obnoxious. It's funny. This is so odd that you brought this topic up, because I had my first really awkward argument with a stranger about 2 weeks ago.
Oh, really? Like just a guy on the street?
No. It was at the film club I go to, and it was a guy I met from Belgium. Very interesting guy, very smart. And somehow, I don't even know how we got on the topic. This was fairly drunken, after midnight thing. And we started talking about fortune telling and, stuff that relates to what we're talking about. And he told a fairly crazy story of a fortune teller that him and his buddy went to back in Belgium.
Okay.
One of the typical anecdotal, somehow the fortune teller knew X. And, I basically do this stuff for a living. I've got 10 years of my students recording Thai fortune tellers. I've got the recordings,
Yeah.
And, so I gave my usual responses. I was like, I said, I don't trust your memory of what the fortune teller said, because when my students record the fortune tellers, it falls apart very easily, and it's never what they remember. And, he actually got very offended. He's like, I'm telling you, I was there. This is what the fortune teller said. He's like, I was there. This is what the fortune teller said. It's a very amazing story. But these stories are actually quite common. This is not. I was trying to tell him it's not unusual that many people claim to have seen Bigfoot. Many people claim to have seen aliens. Many people claim to have claim that fortune tellers have made unbelievable predictions. It's actually common. In his story, and I don't want to get into the whole. His story was like, the fortune teller told my friend that he lives in a house with a basement, and there's no one has basements in Belgium, and in the basement there's an old dresser. There's an old set of drawers, and then if he goes in one of the drawers, he'll find an old picture book. And in one of the pictures will be a picture of this kid's grandfather. It was like, so it really was this unbelievable thing. And I'm just like, that is an amazing story, but I don't believe that happened. It's just because there's never been a recorded thing. So it's like anytime anyone turns on a tape recorder, in front of fortune teller, they never make predictions like that end up being true.
Right.
Right?
Okay. Fair enough.
Never. Anyway, it just ended up being, and this is a Westerner. So again, that's why I don't think it's helpful to make this a East-West thing, because he was really upset that that I didn't believe like historian. I'm like, it wasn't like I thought he was lying. I just don't trust his memory of what happened.
Fair enough. Yeah. Now, let me ask you something. There's one thing that's going to be happening in a bunch of years that I'm still curious about how I'm going to react. Actually, I'm not curious how I know how I'm going to react, but if you were a father, if you had a kid and your son wanted to go into the monkhood, wanted to join a monastery for a long time, as most Thai males are expected to do, how would you deal with that? Would that be a big issue for you or what?
I wouldn't have a problem with that, only because I would hope that he gets some meditation training, or I try to steer him towards a temple that I'm pro meditation guy, so I'm like a secular, I'm not sure I'd necessarily call myself like a secular Buddhist, but it's like I'm very pro Eastern philosophy, except for the supernatural stuff, so it's like that's kind of my thing. My thing is I don't really believe in supernatural stuff, but I think there's a lot of wisdom. And I think there's a lot of wisdom in Asian traditions and kind of good psychology. Like I think Buddhism is like ancient psychology. So going to be a monk, that wouldn't bother me at all. Especially if there was like, it's interesting because different temples are very different. Not all temples are focused on meditation. In fact, most of them are not in Thailand. Like you have to go to very specific ones that have like a excellent meditation teaching. So that in itself wouldn't bother me. The only thing that would, I don't know, I'm not sure. It's such like the fatherhood thing is so unique. It's so unique, and it's such a delicate balance, because even if you try to like really push science on him, that might turn him away from it. So even without the in-law problem, or even without the split family problem. You can't force stuff on kids. That just turns them off.
Yeah, you're right. You're right. So again, I think it's just, you've just got to take it all in stride and understand that you're living in a very multicultural, multi-belief society, and embrace that. Make it part of the lessons as you're growing up. And there's another facet to this too, is that we were playing a video game today about an archaeologist who's off on a treasure hunt, and he has to find this mythical cross of Jesus. And my son learned about Jesus in school. It's not a religious school, but he learned about it in a history class. So he also asked me about Jesus, and it came up like about how I don't believe in the religious concept of Jesus. And he was like, "Why?" I'm like, "Oh, here we go." And I'm like, so
well, sit down.
I realize a lot of his teachers at school are Filipino.
Right, probably Catholic, right?
Now it's in the back of my mind, like, oh, great, he's going to go to school, and next time one of his teachers says something about Jesus, he's going to go, "My dad doesn't believe in Jesus," or something like that. But it's fill in the blanks. My dad doesn't believe about,
my dad's
ghosts,
a heathen, right?
Or,
sure, yeah.
Joining a temple or meditating or whatever.
Right.
So
it's tough. Again, I don't want to offer advice to like a dad when I'm not a dad, but I think you got to somehow just let your kids, even if if he grew up and became very religious, I think you would just have to accept it and maybe kind of secretly hope it was a phase. You're hoping like, okay, I hope this only lasts a couple of years, but whatever. You obviously got to let them figure it out. But you got to make sure he's got the tools to do it. I sometimes feel with my students, I feel like I'm getting them a little bit too late. Like I'm just, so it is frustrating. Where
right.
So it does matter what you do.
It does.
It would be nice to be able to say, "Greg, you just have to be nice and give him a hug and tell him you love him and everything's going to be okay." But I'm not sure that's true. It's like you are.
Well, if only it was that easy.
Yeah, you are providing a foundation for how he thinks.
Yeah, exactly. So I've got to be careful about how I present this. And funnily enough, the whole argument that this entire episode is supposed on, of like the confusing multidisciplinary, multi-belief system that we're raised in, might actually be a really good thing for him to see, because it does show that you don't have to come down hard on one side and, reject everything else that doesn't line up with what you've chosen as your belief system.
Right. Or, to me, the lesson, I think that's true what you're saying, but I think to me, the lesson is about just getting along with people and seeing different facets of people and realizing, hey, this person here, I love them. They're great. They're fantastic. They're smart, but they have these beliefs that I don't agree with. You know what I mean? Like, just seeing the whole the whole person. And to me, sometimes when I dwell on it, it's hard, man. You know, some of my friends who are very religious, just like, I'm like, I don't get it. I don't get it, but they don't get me either. You know?
That's right.
You know, they don't get, because I've talked to them, and they kind of can't imagine life without a God. It's just like part of their mindset. They're like, how can you live, or how can you get out of bed in the morning? So whatever. I mean, I do think I'm right. I mean, they think they're right, but the whole point is getting along and moving on, you know?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So, I mean, I don't know how to wrap this up, but I just thought it was an interesting thing to talk about. And I think that as he gets older, I'm going to have to learn to ask him questions and, get him to think about things, how he thinks about them, whatever that is.
For sure. I mean, I'm sure you're on top of this, but I mean, it's just good schools, good teachers. He doesn't have to end up going into math or science or anything like that. But I think math or science is just a foundation for skepticism and critical thinking. I mean, because you just have to think logically to do math, and whether he ends up being very good at it or not, it's not really the point. It's just really it's just the idea. It's the process, like what it means to be just kind of brutally cold and logical. That's math. That's math and science.
I do want to ask my wife though, what happens when one day he comes up to her and he asks, like, why doesn't Dad believe in ghosts? What's she going to say to him?
That's right.
I think that would be interesting.
No, she's going to go on another podcast and talk about how hard it is to raise a son in like a mixed family.
Exactly. That would be so fascinating to hear. Like, my husband doesn't believe in ghosts. He doesn't go to the temple.
I mean, I'm worried about my son.
What if he doesn't want to go to the monkhood? It's like
that's great.
The bizarro version of this exact same podcast episode.
That's great. That's perfect.
Yeah. But hey, man, we're all in this together. And, so I just think, support, love, and exposing him to as many different things as possible, and then asking him, to make his own decisions and teach him how to think about things and how to analyze things and arrive to his own conclusions.
Yeah. I mean, to me, somehow getting a kid to think that science is cool. Again, it's not because I would want my kid to become a scientist, but I think some of the superstition or whatever is just due to this. People are just not into science because in school it's boring. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And I think if young people think like science is cool, it just opens them up to like that mindset.
Where's Carl Sagan when we need him?
Yeah, that's right. So get on it, dude. Get on it.
Well, anyway, he seems to have a good head on his shoulders, and I think it's something that any long-term expat who has a young family here is something that has to at least think about. You might not have to confront it all the time, and especially if you're in a mixed culture relationship, then it's definitely something you're going to have to think about. But just as long as he grows up understanding and knowing and firmly believing that Die Hard is a Christmas movie,
then all is good.
I will have succeeded.
You have done your job. For sure.
Cool. All right. Let's get into some love, loathe, or live with, where one of us picks a particular aspect of living in Bangkok, which we then discuss and decide if it's something we love about living here, loathe about living here, or have come to accept as something that we just have to learn to live with no matter how we feel about it. And last time, Ed's topic was selective cultural appropriation. So this week it's my turn. And Ed, this is a pretty simple one. I think I did this with Evo a few years ago, but I want to hear what you think about it.
All right, hit me, man.
What do you think of those small rectangular pillows?
Those ones? Wait, so you're not talking about the triangle ones?
No, not the triangle ones. The rectangular ones. They're about this big. They're about the size of a big book.
Dude, I consider these strictly geometric pillows to be useless. I don't get it. So, I mean, you're asking about the rectangular ones, but whether it's the pyramid triangular ones or these, they're too hard and the shape is too rigid. So, yeah. To me, I guess they could serve a purpose being purely ornamental, like because they're not comfortable to lay on or lean on or do anything pillow-like with them.
You say they're pretty ornamental. My mother-in-law has about 4,000 of these things in her bedroom in our condo.
But what do you do with them? I mean, you can't lay on them. I mean,
she sits on them. She puts them on her chair. She uses them as a pillow. She sleeps on the floor sometimes with us and a pillow.
Well, if okay, I mean, right. If you lined up a bunch of these, I could see myself laying on them. But it's like a rigid, it's like a rectangular box, a rigid rectangular box.
I don't understand how someone could look at a little pillow and go, you know what that thing needs? Corners.
Yeah, corn. Yeah, that's right. This is
Corners
funny.
and edges.
Yeah, so this is our Western. So in this case, as Westerners, we're like, "What's up with these right angles? We want right angles. We want right angles on the streets. The streets
Yeah,
should be.
exactly.
The streets should have right angles, but not pillows. Pillows
right.
should not have right angles. You know, we'll have to put these geometric pillows on the same list as fish sauce. We just don't get it. We're like,
I just don't get it.
We do, like, sorry.
It's a good call. Right angles on the streets, curves in the sheets.
That's great. That's great. Yeah, I'm going to go. I mean, I'm basically going to go loathe, although it's not something that obviously bothers me a lot. But yeah, I would never choose to put one in my house unless I had to. Like if you gave me the choice in a shop, that would be those would be the last things I would pick or put on my couch.
Yeah, I am going to go. I don't generally like them. I'm going to go live with, but I have found one use for them that they're actually really good for, and that is, but although they're not designed for this because it's a specifically Farang way to use them. But if you're like kneeling on your knees, put one like under your butt on the back of your heels, like on your Achilles tendons.
That you could sit on. You mean?
Yeah, that you sort of like pad yourself and raise yourself up a little bit higher. They're good for that. Or if you're sitting cross-legged on a floor, which Thais can do for hours, which I can do for about 9 minutes before my spine goes all weird. I'll sit on one of these little pillows and it just raises you up like 3 inches.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. So I see. Yeah, I see its value. Kind of. I see its value as kind of like it's almost like an engineering object. It's like a block.
That's right. That's right.
So I see it. It has like an architectural purpose.
Yeah, pillows by way of Minecraft.
Yeah, and I could see how the strict geometric shapes kind of look cool, but as pillows, I'm gonna go loathe.
I'm gonna go live with.
All right, you're being nice. You're being polite. Okay.
Yeah.
So as we mentioned at the beginning of the show, we'd like to say thank you to Joe Girardi for lending us his support at the show shout-out level. Greg, what did you find out about Joe?
Well, Joe and I chatted back and forth a few times, and he seems like a lovely guy. Now, check this out, Ed. Joe spent 8 years in the Army.
Damn.
26 years at Hewlett-Packard.
All right.
Yeah, and then he said when he retired, he worked for 12 years for a nonprofit organization that ran senior retirement communities.
Damn, he's put his time in.
Totally. And those are big things in the States, right? Like that's what happens when you get old. Your kids kick you out into an old folks home.
Right.
But what's interesting about Asian culture is that, they don't have a lot of old folks homes. They're not really a thing here, at least in
That's
Thailand.
right. Less for sure.
Less. But check this out, because what's interesting is that because of China's one-child policy, there's not really a huge market for child-centric services, but there is interest in retirement communities there. So Joe actually worked as a consultant for one of these places in Beijing for old folks home in Beijing.
Very cool.
I wonder if that was like a forced thing or an organic thing. Like, I wonder if they said like, we don't have a lot of kids, so there's not a lot of kids to take care of old people. Therefore, old people should be put in in old folks' homes.
It's a good question. It does seem kind of contrary to like traditional Chinese culture, but yeah, if you have fewer kids, it makes sense. There's fewer people to take care of older people.
Yeah, exactly. And sort of on a parallel thing here, China actually just relaxed this. In 2015, they relaxed the one-child rule
I
to
saw that.
two-child. And then just last month, they relaxed the two-child rule to three-child.
Oh, I saw that.
Maybe Joe can have a third or fourth career as a kindergarten organization or something like that. Anyway, Joe says, check this out. He said, about 4 years ago, I realized that I had never taken a trip without a business purpose. I never got to go where I wanted, eat what I wanted, take a tour, or sleep in late. After all those years. So, Of course, my first solo trip ever was to Thailand, then Thailand and Vietnam, and soon in the future, I hope, Thailand and Cambodia. I love that part of the world, and especially the food, since I lived in Taipei for 3 years, which I still haven't been to. And he says, finishes it off, and this is the part that warmed the cockles of my heart. He says, now my wife and I take my vacations, her vacations, and most importantly, Ed, us vacations.
Wow, that does warm the cockles of my heart. So I'm going to use that word as much as I possibly can. No, this is great. Joe, thank you very much for your support. We appreciate it. You certainly deserve to relax. It sounds like you've worked a 3 person's worth of jobs in your life. So
Totally, yeah.
You deserve Thailand.
Although I don't really envy Joe, because after that many years, sort of being a slave to your job and then finally realizing that, like, damn, I'm owed a whack load of vacations. Like, he must be just run off his feet, having fun, traveling around the world.
I feel so bad for him.
Yeah, well, thanks for your support, Joe. We appreciate it, man. And let me know when you're on an us vacation in Thailand, and us will take you out for beers.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
All right. A final thanks to all of our patrons who support the show. Patrons get a ton of cool perks and the warm, fuzzy feeling knowing that they're helping support the show. Find out more by clicking support on our website and connect with us online. We're Bangkok Podcast on social media, bangkokpodcast.com on the web, or simply bangkokpodcast@gmail.com. We love hearing from our listeners and always reply to our messages.
We do so. You can also listen to each episode on YouTube. You can send us a voicemail online that will probably feature on the show, or you can even reach out to me directly on Twitter or Insta, where I am BKK Greg. Thanks for listening, everyone. Chase those needles, wear your masks, and we'll see you back here next week.
Definitely.
I mean vaccine needles, not like heroin or anything like that.
Good clarification.